and flooding. These are also habitats of ethnic minorities. La Nina, El Nino, related dry spells are increasingly affecting peoples, etc. I think most of you already are familiar with this phenomena. Please. Okay, having said that, let's now look at adaptation in Southeast Asia, looking at two basic areas. As I mentioned earlier, planned and autonomous adaptation. What are these? As well as the constraints and enabling factors to people's adaptation from a gender perspective. Please. The impacts of climate change actually cuts across sectors, whether it be agriculture, whether it be fisheries, water management, health and infrastructure. Also, in connection with what the IPCC has mentioned, climate change will exacerbate existing food insecurity, as well as other conditions of disease and other conditions of vulnerability, especially in the rural areas. Now, this would be compounded by other non-climactic stresses such as globalization, poverty, weak institutions, as well as insecurity, especially political insecurity. Economic and livelihood systems, access to physical infrastructure, social and gender barriers also exacerbate the impacts of climate change. Now, all these actually, even personal attributes, will all influence who will be the hardest hit, who will be the most affected, and how. If we look at adaptation, please. Also connecting with what the IPCC has stated, and we actually employed this definition throughout the entire study. The actions that people will take in response to, or in anticipation of projected or actual changes in climate to adjust to and cope with impacts. There are two types of adaptation, as you know, reactive adaptation and anticipatory adaptation. And finally, the types of adaptation strategies are either planned or unplanned. And these strategies may be differentiated according to women and men, according to ethnicity, as well as according to class, as well as according to spatial scale, whether it be the local or more regional levels, and as well as differentiated according to ecological zones. Now, what would be the role of gender in climate change? Very fast, gender influences who will be most affected. Second, gender may actually influence and differentiate what types of strategies women and men may employ. And finally, the effectivity of strategies, gender will also enable and constrain women's and men's adaptation strategies. Southeast Asia, please. Okay, as you also know, there are many planned initiatives already. The UN, the first national communications have been submitted by countries. The National Adaptation Plan for Action have been submitted by least developed countries. There have been community-based adaptation programs, as well as disaster risk reduction and coping strategies. Most of these local adaptation initiatives have actually sidestepped gender, or at least gender has not been thoroughly mainstreamed in all efforts to actually plan for local adaptation. Please. Now let's look at, and this is very interesting, autonomous forms of adaptation. And you will see from the literature, we also did a review of literature, there are different ways people adapt to climate change. It can be change of infrastructure, whether to housing and other types of infrastructure. They may retreat. They have capacities as well to actually change seed varieties, cropping, alter their cropping patterns. They may diversify livelihoods. They may migrate, labor migration. They may actually also receive aid from informal social networks like kin. They may increase their claim-making vis-a-vis institutions and public agencies. And as well, they may reduce their consumption because climate change has directly affected their food security. What are the constraining and enabling factors from our research? We found out that in a lot of the governments in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of inter-ministry competition and turf wars with regards to the climate change agenda in general. And this produces unnecessary delays. Traditional bureaucratic rigidities as well as administrative separatism has also slowed down the process of planned adaptation. The dominant style of governance in Southeast Asia tends to militate against developing synergies and partnerships among governments, and women's organizations, women's groups actually have not been thoroughly or at least fully represented in many environmental programs. They are not a traditional constituency. I have been working on gender and environment since the early 1990s. And it has been a very difficult task to really bring in women or gender specialists, if you like, or feminists, if you like, into the environment circuits. And it has been very difficult to bring environmentalists into the women's groups. So somehow we're always in this very ambiguous position. Please. What other constraining and enabling factors are there? Just juncture between broad-scale national level discussions and the inability to bring them at local level or to bridge macro-scale analysis of climate change to more practical and local accessible levels. Another thing, adaptation in the literature has always been treated as like a technical fix. Or a technical means with which to reduce and minimize climate change impacts. This is quite pervasive from our investigation. Please. This is just one example. Look at this slide. This is a slide on a Southeast Asian country, coming from a Southeast Asian country, and looks at the adaptation strategies of farmers. They're very technical. It's a very technical list of adaptation strategies. It is not people-centered, and for us this is a constraining factor actually, because adaptation is understood largely in terms of adjustment within natural systems to climate change, and often not looking at social adaptation strategies. Please. So this is a counter list of social adaptation strategies that people actually employ vis-a-vis climate change impacts. Please. All right, now this is the gaps that we saw with respect to knowledge. I'm just going to read to you the 4 gaps, and this is what I believe the program will center on, will focus on later when they come to their call for proposals. First, in Southeast Asia, mobility and credit is an autonomous adaptation strategy and the systems that support them. This has been under research. There are policy challenges in this realm. Second, livelihood security of small-scale subsistence fisher folk and farmers, another under-researched and under-focused area for both policy and research. Third, resilience, creating resilience to health-related impacts. Notice these are 2 columns, and on the right side you have the gender dimensions. So gender is not lost here in all these gaps. Fourth, governance of adaptation across scales remains to be a challenge. When we say across scales, local, meso, micro, meso, and the macro levels. There are governance challenges with respect to planned adaptation. Always the challenge is, do we build on people's autonomous strategies of adaptation, or are we just inventing our own? There are also gender gaps that have been identified, the right-hand side corner, or the column. So in a nutshell, that has been the study that we had done. If you would like copies of the Southeast Asia or the Asia report, China, South Asia, as well as Southeast Asia, and the main report, please give me your calling cards.
Can we download it in your website?
We don't have it on our website yet, but you can just send me an email, and definitely we'll send you copies. We don't have hard copies yet, just electronic copies.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much, Babette. Can you maybe please